cafe was filled with laughter, silverware clinking, and the quiet confidence of money. A billionaire lifted his spoon, and from behind a fence, a homeless girl screamed words that would silence an entire crowd. "Don't eat that." No one took her seriously. No one believed her. But within minutes, the truth would expose a betrayal no amount of wealth could hide, and prove that courage doesn't live where comfort does. The city never truly slept. It only pretended not to notice. Morning rushed into afternoon as traffic hummed, people hurried past storefronts, and conversations floated through the air without ever touching the ground. In this world of movement and money, only those who belonged were seen. Aaliyah did not belong. At 16, she had learned how to stand perfectly still while life walked around her. She wore the same faded hoodie every day, its sleeves too long, its fabric stretched thin from use and weather. The shoes on her feet had once been white. Now they were cracked, gray, and barely holding together. Hunger lived inside her like a dull ache that never fully went away. She didn't beg anymore. Begging made people angry. She didn't cry either. Crying made people uncomfortable. Instead, Aaliyah watched. She stood near the iron fence, bordering the park café, pretending to be fascinated by the fountain across the walkway. In truth, her eyes moved carefully, reading faces, studying gestures, a skill she had perfected on the streets. The park café was not meant for girls like her. It was a place for polished shoes and pressed suits, for voices that carried authority and wallets that carried power. Waiters moved like dancers between tables, balancing porcelain plates topped with food that smelled impossibly rich. Warm bread, herbs, butter, roasted meats. Each scent twisted Aaliyah's stomach tighter. She shifted her weight, hugging herself as laughter spilled from the patio. People talked about investments, vacations, and meetings, words that meant nothing to survival. Then her eyes landed on one table in the center. It wasn't just the food that caught her attention. It was the man. He sat straight-backed, dressed sharply despite his age, with the quiet dominance of someone who had never been ignored in his life. His silver hair was neatly combed, his glasses rimmed in gold. Everything about him spoke of control. This was Bernard Green, though Aaliyah didn't know his name yet. Across from him sat a woman who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. Perfect hair, perfect posture, perfect smile. Too perfect. Aaliyah's instincts stirred. Living on the streets teaches you one thing above all else. Pay attention, because danger rarely announces itself. She watched the woman more closely now. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes. The way her fingers tapped restlessly against her designer handbag. The way she barely looked at the man she was dining with. Aaliyah leaned slightly closer to the fence, curiosity overtaking hunger. She didn't know it yet, but this moment, this quiet observation, was about to place her in the path of something far bigger than herself, something deadly. And for the first time in a long while, being invisible would not be an option. The table at the center of the patio commanded attention without demanding it. People didn't stare openly. They noticed, then looked away, the way you do when you recognize power and instinctively give it space. Even the waiters approached it with a slightly straighter posture, their movements careful, respectful. Bernard Green had earned that reaction over decades. He was 72 years old, yet the air around him still carried authority. He had started with nothing, no inheritance, no connections, only ambition sharpened by discipline. In his 20s, he had entered real estate with a single risky investment. By 40, his name was known in boardrooms. By 60, he owned companies people assumed had always existed. Money had shaped his life, but it hadn't softened it. Today, though, something about him felt different. Aaliyah sensed it before she understood why. Bernard studied the menu, his brow slightly furrowed, as if the words required more effort than they should. His hand rested near his phone, fingers twitching faintly. When the waiter poured sparkling water, Bernard thanked him, but his voice lacked its usual firmness. Across from him sat Marissa Green. She looked flawless in a way that didn't invite warmth. Her dress clung perfectly to her frame, tailored within an inch of its life. A diamond bracelet caught the sunlight every time she moved her wrist, sending sharp flashes of light across the table. Marissa smiled often, too often, but Aaliyah noticed what others missed. The smile appeared and vanished on command. Her eyes stayed empty. Marissa barely touched her food. She nodded occasionally while Bernard spoke, but her attention drifted back to her phone again and again, scrolling, typing, deleting. Her fingers were restless, impatient. "You're distracted," Bernard said calmly, glancing up from the menu. Marissa looked up instantly, her expression softening into practiced affection. "I'm listening," she replied sweetly, reaching across the table to rest her hand over his. "I just enjoy being here with you." Her tone was gentle, her touch was light. But Bernard pulled his hand back moments later, unnoticed by everyone except Aaliyah. The girl tilted her head slightly, studying them now with focused curiosity. Hunger still gnawed at her, but instinct had taken control. She had seen couples fight over scraps, seen smiles hide cruelty, seen calm voices precede violence. This table felt wrong. The waiter returned with their order. A pristine white bowl of soup was placed in front of Bernard, steam rising softly into the air. A basket of warm bread followed, then polished silverware arranged with care. The smell reached Aaliyah instantly. Her stomach tightened painfully. Bernard thanked the waiter and glanced down at his phone as a message appeared on the screen. He adjusted his glasses, distracted, scrolling briefly. That was when Aaliyah saw it. Marissa's hand slid into her handbag with a smooth, unhurried motion, the kind that wouldn't attract attention. Her fingers moved with certainty, as if she had rehearsed this moment. Aaliyah leaned forward slightly, her grip tightening on the fence. Marissa's hand emerged holding a tiny glass vial, clear, small, ordinary, deadly quiet. Aaliyah's breath slowed. She watched as Marissa twisted the cap open without looking down. No hesitation, no nerves, just precision. The vial tilted subtly over the bowl, and a thin stream of clear liquid disappeared into the steaming soup, gone in seconds. Marissa stirred once, twice. Then she set the spoon down. Her face never changed. Bernard was still looking at his phone. Aaliyah's heart slammed violently against her ribs. She told herself she must be mistaken, that her hunger was making her imagine things, that people like this, rich, beautiful, powerful, didn't do things like that in public. But then Marissa leaned forward, her voice low, carefully controlled, just loud enough. "After everything I've put up with," she murmured, her lips barely moving, "you're not walking away from this." Aaliyah felt cold spread through her chest. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a mistake. Something terrible was about to happen, and the man sitting at that table had no idea. And standing behind a fence, shaking with fear and hunger, was the only person who had seen it. A girl the world refused to notice. Aaliyah stepped back from the fence, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through her chest. The noise of the café rushed back into her ears. Laughter, cutlery clinking, waiters calling orders. But it all sounded distant now, like she was underwater. Her mind replayed the moment again and again. The vial, the liquid, the calm way Marissa stirred the soup. Her stomach twisted, and this time it wasn't from hunger. She pressed her back against the cool iron fence and slid down slightly, crouching low so no one would notice her shaking hands. Her fingers curled into her palms, nails digging into skin. "This isn't your problem," a voice inside her whispered. "People like you survive by staying invisible." She had learned that lesson the hard way. On the streets, stepping into someone else's business didn't earn gratitude. It earned trouble. Adults didn't listen. Authorities didn't care. And rich people? Rich people never believed girls like her. Aaliyah glanced around. No one was watching Bernard's table closely. No one noticed Marissa's stiff posture or the tension coiled beneath her polished exterior. The café had already moved on, absorbed in its own comfort. Bernard lifted the spoon slightly, still distracted by his phone. Aaliyah's breath caught. Her mind raced through consequences she couldn't afford. If she spoke up and was wrong, she'd be thrown out. Maybe worse. If she spoke up and was right, no one might believe her anyway. If she stayed silent, she didn't want to think about that. She hugged her knees tighter, rocking slightly as memories surfaced, moments she wished she had spoken sooner, moments she had stayed quiet and paid the price. Once, long ago, she had watched a fight escalate because she didn't want attention drawn to herself. Someone had been hurt that night. She still carried the weight of that silence. Her gaze snapped back to Bernard. He set the phone down. The spoon dipped into the soup. Steam curled upward, blurring his face. Aaliyah's chest burned. Wrong is wrong, no matter who it happens to. Her legs felt heavy as she pushed herself upright. Her heart screamed at her to run, to disappear into the city's cracks like she always did. But something stronger held her in place. Not bravery, responsibility. She stepped forward cautiously, her sneakers scuffing softly against the stone walkway. Each step toward the patio felt like walking into a storm. Bernard raised the spoon higher. Aaliyah's mouth went dry. Her voice tried to hide inside her chest, but she forced it out. "Don't," she whispered, too quiet. She took another step. People turned slightly, irritated at the movement near the fence. Bernard's spoon hovered inches from his lips. Time slowed. Aaliyah felt the world narrow to that single motion, the tilt of the spoon, the rise of the steam, the calm confidence of a man who believed nothing could touch him. Her fear broke. She ran forward. "Don't eat that!" Her shout tore through the cafe like shattered glass. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. A fork clattered to the ground. Heads turned in unison. Bernard froze. His eyes widened as he stared at the girl standing beside his table, breathless, shaking, terrified, yet unyielding. Marissa's head snapped toward Aaliyah, her smile vanishing instantly. "What did you just say?" she demanded, her voice sharp and furious. Aaliyah swallowed hard, but she didn't look away. "She put something in your soup," she said, louder now, her voice trembling but clear. "I saw her do it. Don't eat it." A hush fell over the cafe. Dozens of eyes locked onto the table. Bernard slowly lowered the spoon, his hand trembling as he set it down beside the bowl. He looked from Aaliyah to Marissa, and for the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. "What is she talking about?" he asked quietly. Marissa shot to her feet. "You little liar," she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Who even let you near this place? Get away from us." The words stung, but Aaliyah didn't move. Her legs shook, her heart thundered, but she had crossed the point of no return. And now, the truth was standing in the open, waiting to be believed or destroyed. The silence that followed felt heavier than noise. Every table in the cafe had turned toward them now. Conversations were abandoned mid-sentence. Phones lay forgotten beside half-eaten meals. The Park Cafe, a place built on comfort and privilege, had become a courtroom without warning. Aaliyah stood rigid beside the table, painfully aware of every stare. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She could feel judgment pressing down on her from all directions, not because of what she'd said, but because of who she was. A homeless girl, unwashed hoodie, shaking hands. Marissa took a sharp step forward, towering over her. "You expect anyone to believe you?" Marissa snapped, her voice loud enough to carry. "You're just looking for money, or attention, or food. Isn't that what you people always want?" The words cut deep. Aaliyah's throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "I don't want anything," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I just don't want him to get hurt." Bernard watched them both, his expression unreadable. Years of negotiating with ruthless businessmen had trained him to detect lies. The twitch of an eye, the hesitation in a voice. Aaliyah showed none of that. Marissa, on the other hand, was unraveling. "This is absurd," Marissa said sharply, turning to Bernard. "Are you really going to entertain this nonsense? She's a street girl. She probably didn't even see what she thinks she saw." Bernard didn't answer immediately. He looked at the soup, then at the spoon, then back at Aaliyah. "You're certain?" he asked her calmly. Aaliyah nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I watched her pour it in. A small bottle. Clear liquid." She stirred it after. The cafe murmured again. Whispers spread like wildfire. "Did you hear that?" "She sounds sure." "Why is the wife so angry?" Marissa slammed her hand onto the table. "Enough," she shouted. "Bernard, eat your soup and let's leave. This is embarrassing." The force in her voice sent a chill through the crowd. Aaliyah felt it too, the desperation beneath the anger. Bernard leaned back slowly in his chair, his eyes never leaving Marissa's face. "You're telling me to ignore this," he said quietly, "when you've been distant for weeks. Secretive, impatient." Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. "You're imagining things," she snapped, "because you're old and paranoid." The insult landed hard. The cafe gasped. Bernard's jaw tightened. Aaliyah stepped forward before she could stop herself. "If you think I'm lying," she said urgently, "call someone. Test it. Please, just don't eat it." Her voice cracked on the last word. The sincerity in her tone sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Bernard picked up the spoon again, not to eat, but to inspect the soup more closely. He lifted it toward his face, inhaling slowly. Something about it felt wrong. Marissa's breathing became shallow. "Put that down," she hissed. "You're humiliating me." Bernard lowered the spoon. "No," he said firmly. "Something isn't right." Marissa's composure shattered. She grabbed her handbag abruptly and stood up, chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. "I don't have to sit here and be accused by a homeless girl," she said coldly. "I'm leaving." She turned sharply, ready to walk away. Before she could take a step, Bernard reached out and grabbed her wrist. "You're not going anywhere," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "Not until we clear this." For the first time, real fear flickered across Marissa's face. The waiter, frozen nearby, finally found his voice. "Sir, Should I call the police? The question echoed through the cafe like a gunshot. Marissa shook her head violently. No, this is a misunderstanding, she said quickly, her voice trembling now. Bernard, don't do this. Bernard didn't hesitate. Yes, he said to the waiter. Call them. Aaliyah exhaled sharply, her knees threatening to give way. Relief washed over her, but it was mixed with fear. She had spoken the truth, but truth had a way of turning dangerous before it became safe. Marissa stared at her with pure hatred. You've ruined everything, she whispered. Aaliyah met her gaze. I didn't, she replied softly. You did. As sirens wailed faintly in the distance, the cafe held its breath, knowing that whatever happened next would change all of their lives. The sound of sirens grew louder, cutting through the tense silence that had settled over the cafe. Patrons shifted in their seats, eyes wide, whispers tumbling from lips like fragile glass breaking. No one moved, no one spoke. All attention fixed on the unfolding confrontation at the central table. Aaliyah's chest heaved, her hoodie clinging to her as though it could shield her from what was coming. Sweat beaded on her forehead, not from exertion, but from fear. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to vanish into the city's cracks as she always had. Yet something inside her refused. She could not let him eat that soup. She could not let him be hurt. Bernard's hand lingered over the bowl. He was calm, measured, yet the tremor in his fingers betrayed a storm inside. He had built his empire on caution, foresight, and strategy. But today, he realized even he had been blind. Tell me everything, he said quietly, looking directly at Marissa, the weight of decades of intuition sharpening his tone. And do not lie. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes darted to the crowd, to the cameras now appearing from patrons' phones, capturing every twitch, every gesture. Her polished composure cracked like a fragile mirror. I don't know what you mean, she stammered, though the uneven rise and fall of her chest betrayed panic. This is nonsense. She's just a child, a street kid. She wants attention. She wants to embarrass me. Aaliyah's gaze remained locked on Marissa. She took a slow, deliberate step forward, fists clenched at her sides. I'm not lying. I saw you. You put it in the soup while he was looking at his phone. You stirred it. You whispered those words. I saw it. The cafe seemed to shudder at her boldness. The air was thick with tension. Patrons leaned forward instinctively, drawn to the raw courage in the voice of a girl they had ignored moments ago. Bernard's eyes narrowed, scanning Marissa's face with a scrutiny born from years of reading lies and half-truths. Something shifted there, the slightest hesitation, a flash of guilt. It was enough. The officer who had just arrived stepped closer, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp and unwavering. Ma'am, he said calmly, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. You need to answer some questions. There is a claim that you tampered with this gentleman's food. Marissa's hands shook as she clutched her handbag, her calm veneer shattering completely. She opened her mouth, then closed it, panic rising visibly with each shallow breath. She was caught between defiance and the inevitable collapse of her story. I didn't, she started, voice rising, then faltering. Bernard leaned forward, his eyes piercing, voice low but firm. Enough. I asked the question. The boy spoke the truth. You will speak now. Something inside Marissa broke. The carefully constructed walls of charm, control, and deception crumbled. She exhaled sharply, eyes darting helplessly to the crowd that had silently borne witness to every moment. I was angry, she confessed finally, her words trembling. I was tired of being controlled, tired of being overshadowed. I didn't think he would ever find out. Her voice cracked as sobs threatened to spill. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted to scare him too. She stopped abruptly, realizing the full weight of what she had admitted. The cafe gasped collectively. Patrons leaned closer, phones held high, eyes wide. Bernard's hand rested lightly on the table. He did not speak. He did not move, but the hard lines of his face softened slightly, just enough to reveal a shadow of the man beneath the armor. A man shocked, betrayed, and yet strangely relieved that the truth had surfaced before disaster could strike. The officer stepped forward, authority clear in every movement. Ma'am, he said firmly, you are under arrest for attempted poisoning. Place your hands where I can see them. Marissa's scream echoed through the cafe, a mix of rage, fear, and disbelief. She struggled briefly, the sound of handcuffs snapping into place, cutting through the room. For the first time, her power was gone. She was no longer in control, and everyone could see it. Aaliyah took a deep breath, feeling the tension in her shoulders slowly release. She had spoken up. She had risked everything, and in doing so, she had prevented a tragedy. Bernard finally exhaled, the spoon set aside, untouched. His gaze, for the first time in the afternoon, met Aaliyah's directly. There was a flicker of gratitude, respect, and something deeper, a recognition of courage, of a soul that refused to be silenced. "You saved my life," he said quietly, almost to himself, then louder so she could hear. "And I don't know how to thank you." Aaliyah's lips quivered, but she managed a small, wary smile. "I just couldn't let it happen," she whispered. Bernard nodded thoughtfully, looking around the cafe at the witnesses, the murmuring crowd, the cameras capturing every detail. "Most people would have ignored it," he said softly. "Most would have turned away. But you didn't. You acted when it mattered." Aaliyah swallowed hard, the adrenaline slowly ebbing, leaving a raw ache in its place. For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen. The sirens outside grew louder as additional police arrived to ensure the situation was under control. Bernard, still seated, picked up his phone and made a quick call. Within minutes, arrangements were being made to give Aaliyah shelter, a warm bed, and food. She hadn't expected gratitude. She hadn't expected acknowledgement. But now, in that moment, she realized courage could change more than just one life. The cafe slowly returned to normal. Conversations resumed, though quieter, more subdued. Patrons whispered about what had happened, the story of the homeless girl who had stopped a crime spreading in hushed tones. And in the center of it all, Aaliyah stood, small but unbowed, having turned fear into action, silence into truth. The cafe hummed with a subdued energy now, the earlier tension settling into whispers and stolen glances. Patrons cautiously returned to their meals, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others quietly recording the extraordinary scene they had just witnessed. Yet all attention remained anchored to Bernard and the girl who had stopped a potential tragedy. Aaliyah, still standing near the fence, felt every eye on her. Hunger, fatigue, and fear still lingered, but something heavier pressed on her chest. Hope. For the first time in years, she felt that her existence mattered, that her voice, small and uncertain in the world's noise, had been heard and had made a difference. Bernard pushed his chair back slowly, the polished silver reflecting the soft sunlight. He reached out and gestured toward Aaliyah. "Come here," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Aaliyah hesitated, glancing at the officers who were finishing up paperwork nearby. The girl inside her screamed to stay hidden, to remain invisible, but something stronger pulled her forward. Slowly, she stepped toward the table, each footfall deliberate. Bernard's eyes softened as she approached. "You were brave," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Most people wouldn't have dared. Most would have turned away, but not you." Aaliyah shifted her weight, unsure what to say. Words felt small in the wake of such recognition. Her voice barely emerged. I just couldn't let it happen," she murmured. Bernard nodded, his gaze scanning her thin, worn clothes and the traces of hardship etched across her young face. "And yet, you stood up to danger. That takes more strength than most adults possess." A whisper of admiration rippled through the cafe. Patrons who had once ignored her presence now stared in awe. Some whispered to friends, "Who is this girl? How could someone so small have so much courage?" Bernard picked up his phone and began making arrangements. Within the hour, a trusted social worker and volunteer organization were on their way to provide Aaliyah with food, shelter, and medical attention. A safe place, something she had not known for years. She felt a lump in her throat, unsure whether to cry or smile. "You don't have to live like this," Bernard said, his tone gentle. "You've proven yourself today. You've shown strength, integrity, and wisdom. Let me help you." Aaliyah shook her head at first. Pride and suspicion warred within her. I don't want charity," she said softly. But Bernard only smiled, a calm, knowing smile that conveyed understanding, not pity. "This isn't charity," he replied. "It's justice, for what you did, and for the life you deserve." The officers stepped aside, letting the moment unfold. Marissa was being taken away, her face a mixture of fury and defeat, leaving behind only whispers and gasps. The cafe's energy shifted. The world felt just a little more balanced because truth had been revealed, because courage had been rewarded. Aaliyah looked around, taking in the cafe for the first time as more than a backdrop of fear and tension. Sunlight glinted off polished silverware, flowers smelled sweeter than she remembered, and the sounds of life, laughter, conversation, clinking dishes, no longer made her stomach twist with anxiety. They were ordinary sounds that now carried a hint of possibility. Bernard gestured to a waiter, who offered a plate of fresh bread and a cup of tea. "Eat," Bernard instructed. "You've earned it." Aaliyah hesitated, then took the food. Each bite tasted of warmth and safety, something she had long forgotten. Her throat tightened, a tear slipping silently down her cheek, but it was a tear not of pain, but of relief, of recognition, of hope. In that moment, Aaliyah understood something she hadn't before, that courage, even when unseen, has power, that integrity and bravery can alter the course of lives, that one voice, no matter how small, can change the world. Bernard's gaze softened further. "You've shown us all something today," he said, looking around at the now hushed crowd. "Sometimes the people we overlook, the ones society ignores, have the most to teach us." Aaliyah's chest swelled with something she had never known. Belonging. Not just in that moment, but perhaps in the future she had dared to imagine. The sirens faded as authorities ensured Marissa was escorted away, the crowd slowly returning to their own lives, carrying whispers of the brave girl who had saved a life. And in the midst of it all, Aaliyah felt a spark, a tiny, fierce flame, that the world might one day notice her not for what she lacked, but for the strength she carried within. The evening sun cast long shadows across the park café as Aaliyah sat quietly at a small table near the corner. The chaos of the day had settled into a gentle hum of activity, patrons finishing their meals, waiters moving with practiced grace, and the faint clatter of coffee cups. Yet for Aaliyah, the world felt profoundly different. She wasn't invisible anymore. She had a name, a story, and, most importantly, someone who believed in her. Bernard had insisted she stay until arrangements were made for a safe place to sleep. It was more than shelter. It was a sign that someone, for the first time in a long time, saw her worth. "You did the right thing today," Bernard said, sliding into the chair across from her. His presence was calm, measured, yet carried an authority that made it impossible to dismiss. Many would have walked away, pretending not to see, but you acted. You were honest. You were brave. Aaliyah fiddled with the edge of her sleeve, still uneasy with attention. I was just scared," she admitted softly, "but I couldn't let him get hurt. I had to speak up." Bernard nodded. "And that's exactly why you succeeded. Fear is natural. Courage is acting despite fear. Remember that, Aaliyah. That lesson will carry you farther than anything else in life." Aaliyah felt a strange warmth spread through her chest. Gratitude, yes, but also something more, a sense of purpose. For years, she had wandered the streets, unnoticed, surviving on scraps and shadows. Today, she had made a difference. Today, she had mattered. The social worker arrived shortly after, a kind woman named Mrs. Carter, who guided Aaliyah through paperwork and explained the resources available to her: a safe home, nutritious meals, counseling, and educational opportunities. Aaliyah listened carefully, absorbing every word. For the first time, life felt like it could extend beyond mere survival. Bernard stayed by her side, his interest genuine. "I want you to know," he said, "that bravery like yours doesn't go unnoticed. I will help you find opportunities, not because you're a child of circumstance, but because you have strength, intelligence, and integrity. Those are rare." Aaliyah blinked, her throat tight. "Why me? Why would someone like you care about someone like me?" Bernard's eyes softened, reflecting years of experience and understanding. "Because courage and honesty transcend class, wealth, and background. You've reminded me that the most important things in life aren't what you own, but who you are. Today, you were extraordinary, and extraordinary deserves recognition and support." She nodded slowly, the weight of the day beginning to settle into a quiet resolve. She thought of the countless nights spent alone, hungry and afraid. She thought of the small victories that never mattered to anyone but herself, and she realized something profound. Her voice mattered. Her actions mattered. She had power, in her own way, to influence the world around her. The following days were a whirlwind of adjustments. Aaliyah moved into a safe home, arranged by Mrs. Carter, began attending school regularly, and received guidance from mentors who helped her build skills and confidence. Each step forward was new, unfamiliar, and at times frightening, but she faced it with the same courage that had saved Bernard's life. Word of the cafe incident spread quietly through the community. People whispered about the homeless girl who had stopped a crime, not seeking recognition, but creating change. Aaliyah felt a mix of pride and humility. She didn't act for fame. She acted because it was right, but she also learned the profound impact one individual could have. Bernard checked in frequently, providing encouragement, advice, and small acts of support that allowed Aaliyah to dream bigger than she ever had. He became not just a benefactor, but a mentor, someone who reminded her that the world could be both harsh and kind, cruel and just, often at the same time. One evening, as they walked through the park together, Bernard said quietly, "Remember, Aaliyah, the world will try to ignore you." Aaliyah smiled softly, the first time she truly felt her inner strength reflected in the eyes of another. She didn't just survive anymore, she was learning to thrive. Weeks had passed since the incident at the park café, and Aaliyah's life had begun to transform in ways she could never have imagined. The streets that had once confined her to shadows were now a memory, replaced by the safe walls of her new home and the promise of education, guidance, and opportunity. Yet the lessons she learned that day, courage, integrity, and the power of one voice, stayed with her like a quiet flame, burning steadily, lighting her path forward. Bernard visited frequently, always offering encouragement, never pity. He had arranged for tutors to help Aaliyah catch up in school, mentorship programs to help her navigate life, and introductions to people who could provide real opportunities. But the most profound gift he gave her was belief, the unwavering conviction that she was capable of greatness. One afternoon, as they sat together reviewing her plans for the coming year, Bernard leaned back, while his hands folded calmly. "Aaliyah," he said softly, "what you did that day wasn't just about stopping someone from harm. It was about showing integrity, standing for what is right, and proving that even the smallest voice can echo loudly when courage guides it." Aaliyah's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She thought of the cafe, the stares of the patrons, the rage of Marissa, and the weight she had carried while speaking the truth. She had felt fear, vulnerability, and uncertainty, but also power, the quiet strength that comes from knowing you did the right thing when it mattered most. "I never expected any of this," she whispered. "I just wanted him to be safe." Bernard smiled, a mix of pride and warmth softening the hard lines of his face. "And you did more than that. You changed the course of more than one life, yours included. Courage like yours is rare, integrity like yours even rarer. Never forget it." Over time, Aaliyah thrived. She returned to school, excelled academically, and discovered a love for helping others, particularly children and youth who, like her, had been overlooked or marginalized. She volunteered at community centers, spoke at events, and became a quiet force of inspiration, proving that strength and compassion could coexist. But the lesson wasn't lost on her alone. Bernard, observing her growth and determination, began to reevaluate his own life. He realized that wealth and power were meaningless without integrity and courage. He had assumed that the world ran on control and dominance, but Aaliyah had reminded him of a simple truth. True strength lies in doing what is right, not in what you can take or command. The memory of Marissa faded over time, replaced by gratitude and recognition of the young girl who had dared to speak when the world demanded silence. Aaliyah knew that life would continue to challenge her, that fear and doubt would resurface, but she also knew she had faced the ultimate test of courage, and she had passed. As she looked out the window of her new home, sunlight streaming across her face, Aaliyah understood the most important lesson of all. No matter your age, your status, or how invisible the world makes you feel, one act of courage can ripple through countless lives. Integrity, bravery, and honesty are never wasted. They are seeds that grow into extraordinary change. She smiled, a full, genuine smile for the first time in years. She had been small, overlooked, and underestimated, but she had learned that the world bends to those who dare to stand, even when trembling with fear. And in that courage, she had found not just survival, but triumph, purpose, and hope. Moral of the story: even the most overlooked and underestimated individuals have the power to change lives. Courage and integrity, no matter how small the voice, can create ripples of transformation far beyond what one can imagine. Standing up for what is right, despite fear, is the true measure of strength. If this story inspired you, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more powerful stories of courage, hope, and triumph. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one voice, one brave choice, can change lives. And comment below. Tell us about a time you stood up for what's right, no matter how impossible it seemed.